So I will call the meeting to order. With that being said, I do want to start off and with some thanks and recognition. One to to Chief Brackney and the CPD on how the last press conference was conducted. I think it was done in a balanced way for the community overall, to where we can get some insight from both the policing side and also the civilian interaction side. And then it was also noted prior to about her transparency on the reporting on the website that isn't necessarily done in some other police departments across the country. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And then also to acknowledge Ms. Robertson, our acting city attorney, who has helped us quite a bit with regard to legal opinions and making sure that we are operating inside the bounds of state code and also municipal code. We'll, in some of our ordinance discussion, we'll see some of her work there as well. So definitely wanted to publicly thank her for that. So from there, we want to go to the agenda approval. Does anyone have any changes that they would like to make from the agenda or suggest?
Chairman, yes. I don't know if it's a change, but it is a question. When we get down to item 7, which is update on hearing procedures, is this just an update, or are we going to be actually discussing language and process and actually adopting a procedure that we'd like to have as an active procedure? That's the first question. And my second question would be, I would want to know how many people that are on the webinar would want to speak to that particular issue. I don't know if there are, but it does seem to garner a lot of comment in different platforms about this particular process. And I was wondering if Jeremy might be able to poll the webinar crowd to see if there is anyone interested in that particular topic, and perhaps it would be enough that would warrant carve out public comment just for that.
Well, before that, to answer the initial question, this is just an update. We do have probably another. This is just an update at this point. I'll address more fully when we get to that. So it's not going to be a voting on. We do have some more time, and I'll clarify that when we get to that point.
Okay, then my second question is moot because you've answered it by answering the first one. It's fine.
Sure.
So I would like to make a motion that we adopt the agenda for the PCRB April 7th, 2021 or April 8th, rather, 2021 as presented.
Is there a second? Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board?
Sure. Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Fratcher? Mr. Fratcher?
Frazier.
No, I'm sorry.
Muted, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry.
Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Frazier.
Frazier, okay. Mr. Mendez?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
And Ms. Gilmore?
Yes.
Okay. So that passes. So the next agenda item is the adoption of minutes. Mr. Mendez sent that out. If anybody has any objections to what was sent out, please.
Just to point out that the minutes for the meeting before last were updated and corrected per the request of Ms. Carpenter.
Okay. Does anyone have any objections? Okay, so do we have a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved that we adopt the minutes for the March meeting
Is there a second?
Second.
Miss Robinson, if you would pull the board.
Sure. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
yes,
Mr. Mendez,
Yes,
Mr. Watson,
Yes.
and Ms. Gilmore.
yes,
Right. So that passes. And we are now at the opportunity for public comment. Mr. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind, I guess, polling the attendees to see if there's anyone
Yeah.
that would like
If
to.
you'd like to speak at this time, please click the raise hand icon in your Zoom webinar, or if you're joining us via telephone, press *9. All right. Harold Foley is first. Mr. Foley, can you hear us?
Yes, can y'all hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Hey, thank y'all so much. I appreciate all the work y'all do. This is a volunteer board, so I appreciate all y'all time. Tonight I just got two things. Well, really three. I want to suggest that we will have that you put your agenda on the publicize your agenda in advance to the public and make and publicize the meetings earlier. And it'd be great to put your agenda on your website also. Also, I suggest that the documents that you're going to be talking about be also added to the agenda, so folks can see it, that community folks can see it and have an opportunity to speak on it. I know things are like, a long process, but I want to make sure that community folks can have an opportunity, if they need to see the documents and actually to speak to it during the meeting time. I also want to invite folks on the PCRB. Nancy Carpenter actually had been with us a couple of times, but the People's Coalition is doing presentations to do some community engagement. So I like to invite folks to be able to sit in with us to do the presentation. We have another presentation this week coming up, and we probably have one in next week. So I say to this, Nancy is the communication person, but if anyone else want to sit on the presentation with us, please just reach out to me or Nancy. Thank y'all so much. And like I said, I really appreciate the hard work that y'all doing. I wouldn't dare sign up for it because I know how targeted you are getting from the community, but I appreciate the work. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Walt Heinecke. Mr. Heinecke, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Members of the board, I also wanted to echo Mr. Foley's commendation about all the work that you're doing and the appreciation that we have in the community for all that work in a voluntary modality. I have two issues I just wanted to raise and get feedback on at some point during the meeting. The first one is I'd really like to know at this point where board members stand on the intent of changing the ordinance so that it maximizes on what the state is now going to allow us to do in terms of expanded scope and authority by July 1st, I believe it is. So July 1st is coming up pretty quick. And it takes a while for council to get, to get this stuff organized. And I would really like to see the board embrace a new ordinance that gives the PCRB the greatest extent of authority and power that's authorized by the state in legislation that was passed last year. So I'd like to kind of understand where you are with that process. I think the public would like to understand that, and where each of the board members stands on the intent. And then lastly, I think while we recognize that this group needs to have time to get work done and generate ideas without constant redirection and, sort of interventions and, and critique, I think the creation of foundational documents that you're involved in has to be community driven. So ultimately, in order for there to be a community confidence in whatever is eventually created by the PCRB, there has to be robust community input throughout the development process. So I'm hoping that you will maybe think about changing your procedure during meetings to add short public comment periods after each topic as they come up. So with that, I say thank you again, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time? Please click the raise hand icon. All right, Mr. Chair, we have no more hands raised.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I guess to answer a couple of the questions with regard to the postings, I believe that those will become more streamlined and become more readily available in a I guess longer time fashion once we do get the executive director in place. At this point, I think the board is doing a lot from some of the administrative perspectives in terms of the ordinance and some of these other things, and we're running up against this pressure for the operations to be on the ground and running. So I would fully expect that would change here relatively soon. And then additionally, and this will happen later on with regard to the ordinance. There will be sufficient time for public comment to be part of the process. I think as of right now, I think the public expects that the board itself would have some preliminary discussions regarding it and to be involved in that initial phase as we transition to the more public comment driven phase. So we're not, I understand that the interpretation out there is that we are trying to eliminate the public. We're not at all. We are looking to drive this in a fashion in which we take care of some of the administrative things amongst the board, amongst city attorney's office, with our legal counsel, and then from there, so we don't have all these documents out there that are confusing. Get it to a point to where we're able to say, hey, public, here's what we have. Let's move this forward. I mean, in my experience, when you don't have things where some of the leaders are fully involved, it leads to chaos down the road. So that's something that we are working on, and we're not trying to exclude the public from the process.
If I could just
could I address the board as the comments as well? We've heard from Chairman Brown. I think are you finished, sir?
Absolutely, Ms. Carpenter.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say that I think that we do need to have these documents on our website, even if it had to be a few hours before our meeting. I apologize to the public profusely because I sometimes am remiss at looking at our website, and I'm sorry that these documents, including our agenda, are not on there. So maybe if we don't get a chance to get that agenda, that one item on there, perhaps we can share screen the first maybe 10 or 15 minutes of our meetings each month to share the screen of the agenda in case it doesn't get on our website in a timely manner. And, I'm all for, having documents on our website, and I apologize that they're not on there. I think that, I know I understand what you're talking about chaos, Chairman, but I thought maybe by having revision dates on certain documents, it might lead the public to understand that if they see a series of documents, to understand that we rewrite them and, add language or change language so that they can see what we're adding and changing. Hopefully, like you said, that we can do that next month, which will be, good God, it will be May. The other part is that Mr. Foley asked where we stood on the adoption of the powers that the General Assembly legislated. And I, going to go on record that we get the broadest use of those powers that we possibly can. And I know Mr. Payne has probably heard that from several people. He's hearing it from me as well. And that if we don't advocate for ourselves to get the broadest use of those powers, then I think we're doing a disservice to, to our community. And the last thing I want to comment has nothing to do with public comment, but I do want to say that I appreciate your comments, Chairman Brown, at the beginning of the meeting, but your feelings and your thoughts don't align with mine when it comes to what you were talking about earlier. And I do appreciate that, but I'm not sure that the PCRB should be in the stands, cheering on different things like that. So thank you for letting me have this opportunity to speak, and I'll turn it back over to anybody else that wants to make a comment.
I will just clarify, this meeting's agenda is currently on the city's website. I'm not sure when it was put there. I want to say it was put there at least a couple days ago, just to clarify.
Yeah, it's always on there at least 3 days ahead of time.
And to Mr. Mendez, I know that you want to speak. Just to respond to Ms. Carpenter really quickly. I did, preface with saying that I appreciated the transparency. I think that there are a lot of folk that appreciated that. I think when you look at the actions that were taken in some of the cases, and the fact that those officers are no longer on the a part of CPD, I think that is something that the community itself supports based on the findings of it. And speaking again solely for myself with regard to the community's actions, I think a lot of this across the country is driven toward it's the police, which it does that does have merit. But I think there's also a part that we're missing where an educated public can help buffer some of those interactions with the police and try and deminimize some of the difficulties that's there. And I think that if we're talking about community engagement and those things across the board, and I believe that Mr. Foley had said that his group is going out and they're doing different presentations. I think that's part of it. We're looking at really protecting the public as a whole, and so we have to look at at least from my perspective, we have to look at discussing the whole gamut as opposed to just saying everything is just the police. Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think some of these issues are going to be discussed, under like 0.7 and 9 tonight. So, and also, we're just starting to put things on the website and in our agendas, formative documents. I think, as you'll see later, we're getting close to the point where we'll have at least a primitive draft of an ordinance, which I'm sure the public will be very interested in.
Mr. Frazier, did you have anything that you wanted to say, or?
No, I'm good. Thanks,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Very well. If there are no other concerns on that phase, the next is the status of complaints. So as of 2021, and what do I have here? There have been a total of 12 complaints that are being tracked both by CPD and also the CRB. Well, they're total of 12. We're tracking 7, one of which came through the CRB and went to CPD. The other 6 came directly from CPD to the CRB, and all of them met within that 2 business day time frame. So I know that there is concern that we're not receiving, some of the complaints on the website, on the CPD website itself. It lists 1 through 7. However, there is also an 8 through 12 that's there. It appears that complaints 3 through 7. One looks like it was internally driven. The other, it wasn't selected to go to the PCRB. And I know that there is discussion about, what complaints we receive, and those are things that that we will be working out in the ordinance, as Mr. Mendez will discuss later. I believe that there's a question about the complaint review process. Currently, to file a complaint on the CRB side, you're able to go to the PCRB's email and file a complaint that way. You're also able to mail a complaint at our mailing address to get it done that way. Those are the only 2 methods that we have as of right now. I would look for those methodologies to expand as we move forward. As far as how complaints can be filed with the police department, it can be done by phone, it can be done anonymously, it can be done via mail, it can be done through a CPD supervisor at the police department. And as of April 1, there is a new internal affairs email address that's available. It's also my understanding that as of this April 1 release, once it's sent electronically, I believe it goes to, there it is. So it goes to Chief Brackney, goes to the Assistant Chief Mooney, and then the Executive Director automatically, all at the same time. I know that there has been discussion, well, we don't have an Executive Director, and we have been at the mercy of CPD under that, strict ordinance reading. However, they have provided us with a copy of the complaints themselves, so we're not being hindered from receiving the ones in which citizens check to have us review those complaints. Am I missing anything? So, and so anybody can ask any at public comment later if they have any questions. But there is a synergistic system. That means there is working going on between the PCRB to get the complaints, as well as CPD, to make sure that we're actually, doing our job effectively. And hopefully that answers those questions. All of the processes and all of these things I expect will be updated, once the executive, director comes in place, and to be able to outline things a bit more clearly. Do any of the board members have any questions or comments regarding that? Okay. So the next on the agenda is the update on the executive director process, and I will have to read a verbal disclosure. So I'm disqualifying myself from participating in any board discussions or actions relating to the city's recruitment of the executive director, because I intend to apply to be employed in that position. I've filed a written disclosure statement with the clerk of council, And that statement is available to the public upon request from Ms. Robinson or Ms. Thomas. And at this time, I turn over the gavel to the vice chair until the board's discussion of the recruitment process is finished. And I ask that the minutes of this meeting reflect my verbal disclosure.
Yeah, so thank you, Bellamy. I think you have all seen, since I've sent around an email, the job description and offer that is now posted. It is posted on the Charlottesville Jobs website, and it is also posted on the NACOL website with a 30-day running period. We discussed with the city manager, whether a shorter time would be better because of such an urgent, because it was such an urgent need. And after talking about it, his experience was that 15 days was hardly enough, and that 30 days was about the right duration. At this point, I am not aware that there have been any responses, and I will keep touch with city manager as to progress on that front.
Are we open for some discussion?
Sure.
Okay. I know that the last go around when there was consideration for an ED, we, I don't know if we were invited or we just invited ourselves, but we had two people that we had identified from the board to kind of sit in on this interview process. And of course, at the time it was Mr. Brown and it was Ms. Johnson. So Ms. Johnson's no longer on the board, and Mr. Brown, of course, is pursuing his own interest there. So I'm opening it up to perhaps asking Ms. Gilmore and Mr. Frazier if they would be willing to be the representatives from the board during the interview process. I don't know if either one has the time or the bandwidth or the plate big enough to do that, but I'd like to put those names in consideration for the board to support as our reps during this interview process.
I remember that last. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, if that's the board's wish, I'd be happy to participate in the process.
Yeah, I remember that, the last time around, my feeling was that the decision about who would do the interviewing was done very quickly at the end of the meeting. And I think that there should be some way for us to be a little bit more intentional and, considerate about how we do it this time. So perhaps, and this might be a better way to go, I don't think we're going to be doing anything before our next meeting in the way of interviews. People who are interested in being involved in the interview subcommittee, send an email. And then at the next board meeting, we can see who has volunteered and, if necessary, hold a sort of an informal election.
I certainly think the composition should be similar to what we had before. Male, female, I think that would be very, partially representational and intentional. And I look forward to see who would put the email out there about volunteering to do that.
I have
Okay,
a
so I
question.
will, excuse me.
I'm sorry, go ahead,
Jeffrey,
Mr. Mendez.
No,
I
was
wanted
just
you to finish the
gonna say-
thought. My question's on a somewhat different matter. Related to the
So I
ED.
think that I will, keep people posted on who's expressed interest. And then, as I said, we can put it on the agenda next time. Who wants to be on the interview committee, and we can decide at that point.
My question, Mr. Mendez, had to do with whether the folks from the last go round were notified about the job having that list was stale and that notified that the listing has been reposted.
Yes, they all have.
Okay, good.
So if people want to resubmit, they can do it quite easily.
Right. And the time frame is, it's posted as we speak.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Does any,
It's
gonna
also
say-
on another site. Did you know it's on the cne.org site? It's also on the cne.org. So anybody who's subscribed to that or goes to that website for anything, you can find the job posting there as well.
Yeah, thank you. And we have sent the posting around to sort of all the stakeholders that we've been talking to as we pull the ordinance together, to give them a heads up in case they know of any local candidates that they would like to, make sure it gets around, essentially. For people who don't read the NACOL, don't go on the NACOL website or CNE or whatever.
does anybody remember whether just two people or I don't know whether it's in the ordinance anywhere that just two people, like why not four people? Is there anything that says it's got to be two? Not to confuse things or complicate things,
Yeah,
but
I think
just-
Lisa's the expert, but I believe it's in our bylaws. That we get two people to sit on the interview.
And
Yeah, I think it's in the ordinance as well.
okay.
And while we're talking about openings, any update on any interest in our open board seat? Anything? 'Cause I know it's been recently posted, but anything on that?
so no, yeah. Are you looking for an update from me or the board?
General, whoever has the knowledge.
No other update than that it's been posted. Once posted, it's there for 30 days. And the goal of council is, to just get it appointed as quick as possible.
So I can provide an update, Mr. Chairman. The position is currently being advertised on the city website. Has been for nearly a month now. The application deadline is April 12th. I am checking my email right now, but I do not believe we have had any applicants thus far. I am double checking that. And so if that is in fact correct, or we may need to, take measures to increase the applicant pool, then we would just extend the deadline. But it is posted on the city website right now.
Ms. Robinson, question, is that a vacant position one of the ones for the traditionally underrepresented communities?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I guess, Mr. Chair, it's back over to you.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Mendez. So our next agenda item is the update on the hearings. So we had received the draft from our legal counsel that was circulated amongst the board. It was also presented to the city attorney and the chief for their comments. My expectation is that by Monday, what is this? January, March, April 12th, that will go to public comment for 30 days. That would present us with a May 12th turnaround for that. I know that there was earlier, so our next meeting would be on May 13th to look at that. I know there was earlier mention of having the public speak during the meeting prior to the vote for adopting those those procedures. I know that there's concern about the language and what have you. So my, I guess, hopeful goal is that it would be in place at the next meeting. If we have to extend it to the following meeting, for more public comment, then that's something that can be revisited. But at this point in time, we would look at a tentative vote for May 13th to have those procedures adopted.
Could we have a separate public comment? 2 or 3 people or spots for, anyone that wants to speak particularly to that particular item that we will be presenting to City Council, much like Planning Commission has public hearings on things that they require, and the City Council, has public hearings. I'm not sure about the Human Rights Commission because unfortunately I don't go to that meeting as often as I should. But it would be nice to adopt that as, because that's one of the first pieces I think of work that we've done, I've been able to do since this pandemic put us sideways on being able to, do things in person and, on a more consistent schedule. It'd be nice to hear from the public specifically on that at that item time so that the comments are fresh when we deliberate.
To clarify, do you mean have public comment at the next meeting prior to adoption? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Usually, yeah. Just as the procedure you see sometimes with the other public hearings before the board, whatever board starts their deliberations, they have a period of public comment prior to that, so they can hear what the ideas are and to see if that would, affect any type of thinking that member would have on a on language of the resolution or ordinance or whatever it is to be adopted.
Sure, that's feasible, and I do want to emphasize again that it would be made available to the public on Monday the 12th, and hopefully we would have some public comment throughout that process. You can obviously do it via our email as well. So just to get as much, it'll be an entire 30 days, for that as well. Does any other member have comment? Okay. So our next agenda item, and I'll, Mr. Mendez, I'll let you take the reins here, will be a report of the call with Chief Brackney.
Sure. Again, I've sent around an email on this. We contacted the chief in the last week of March to try and set up a meeting with her, telephone call, Mr. Bellamy and myself, to open a dialogue and get some preliminary feedback on our proposed oversight model. We sent her an outline of the oversight model, which would involve review, investigation, and auditor monitor, and explaining what all of those things were, and proposed a couple of issues that we could talk about, but we really only got to too in depth. It was a very good and constructive and respectful meeting, and I think that bodes well for our future dealings. Not that we agreed about everything by any means, but nonetheless, we spoke and respected each other. We started from the top of our list and with an in-depth discussion of what she saw as the obstacles for the board receiving all complaints. And she felt, and I should say here, I'm speaking from incomplete notes, and I've offered the chief the opportunity to respond in case I misrepresent what she says. but I'm doing my best. She's had problems with us receiving all the complaints. Well, because first, she thought that, quite frankly, people should have a choice. If for some reason they didn't want to have the board get the complaints, and she specifically said, there are some people who would be frightened to cooperate with us, like victims of domestic abuse, witnesses who wouldn't want their names or private information excluded. And part of the problem was that we were speaking at cross purposes, in the sense that she seemed to be a little bit more comfortable with sharing things with the executive director rather than with the board as a whole. But I think this is something that can sort of be resolved. And when we get down to our item 9, we'll talk about it more. She thought that the board would be very poorly placed to actually do independent investigations. She thought that an outside investigator was unlikely to be sufficiently qualified to do a fair and legally defensible investigation. And we talked about, well, how are they going to know what is an act of misconduct? How do you obtain cooperation from complainants, from witnesses? How do you get third-party evidence? And she also said that, as police chief, she's the only one that can give the due process guarantee warnings to the police, and that if we issued subpoenas, people could always contest them and they wouldn't be any use anyway. Let's see what else we got here. We spoke for a short time about disciplinary action. And again, the idea was her concern, her attitude was primarily, skeptical. She strongly encouraged us to avoid getting involved in sort of day-to-day management, and sort of encouraged us to stand back and, get small wins, by writing effective reports, reviewing complaints that people wanted to have reviewed, and doing public outreach. So that's really all that we talked about. Since that time, I've spoken with members of our ordinance work group, and we've had that NAGAL training about investigations. And I think my opinion is that there are enough precedents for investigative models and police oversight organizations that we should not be frightened out of proposing that as one of the parts of our model. Let me see. Yeah, I guess that's a pretty good summary. Does anybody have any questions?
I just had a comment, Mr. Mendez. It seems to me without that investigative piece, I mean, we're really not fulfilling our mission, and it becomes something of a toothless tiger. So I don't know if there was any meeting of the minds with the chief on that, but I am concerned that needs to be central to our mission.
I agree. That's an easy answer.
Was there any meeting of the minds with the chief on that, or was she kind of holding her ground on that?
We were scheduled to speak for half an hour. We spoke for an hour, and which I thought was very good. Even so, we did not touch on a lot of what we wanted to touch on. Okay. So this was the first opening. I got the impression that she was willing. She had strong reservations about independent investigations and the practicality of us being deeply involved in disciplinary decisions. she maintains that individual personnel actions, as she calls them, which include disciplinary or corrective actions, are confidential, period. And we did not unpack that. But when we talk about our the ordinance template, we can address that a little more in detail.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So, are there any other comments or questions?
Before you move too far ahead, I just would like to confirm that we have not received any applications for the current vacancy on the board.
Okay. Thank you for that, Ms. Robinson. So I guess, Mr. Mendez, that leads us right into our discussion regarding the ordinance itself. And I believe that, it's obviously it's good Mr. Payne is here. I think you had an ask that you wanted to make as well.
Yeah, sure. In response to the comments that were made earlier, we've been attempting to involve stakeholders in the development of our oversight model and the drafting of our ordinance, through the consultations with our work group. And for this meeting, this was the first time that we had posted documents related to that with our agenda. So, in the agenda package is a simple summary of the oversight model that we propose. The other important things that have happened are, as I said, Lisa Robertson put together a template for the ordinance, which incorporated specific statutory language from the General Assembly legislation of 2020, gives the board powers per that legislation. What has happened since then is we in the work group and the board, to a lesser extent, have looked at that template and made some comments and sent the comments back to Lisa. And Lisa very graciously worked really hard and gave us a response yesterday. And so now we are deeply engaged in a dialogue with her over, how our oversight model with investigation and disciplinary authority and, auditor monitor would work, and what would be some potential legal hitches and practical things that need to be put into the ordinance and or the procedures document. So thank you very much, Lisa. And I just had time to respond to some of what she's done today, and I hope that I can get other comments from other people as well. But the main reason, and we can talk about the specific item to be placed on the agenda, is I want to propose a resolution for the board that says, having worked on the ordinance for a considerable amount of time, having discussed it with stakeholders, including the chief of police, having developed a template and entered into a dialogue with the attorney, we respectfully request a meeting as soon as possible with the city council to discuss our proposed oversight model. And hopefully, I know you guys are very busy, Michael, but hopefully we can work something out in maybe before the beginning of May. And at that point, we could make a presentation and answer questions. And, again, open a line of communication so nobody gets surprised when the draft ordinance is, across your desk.
Are you still there, Mr. Mendez?
On the will of the board, we can go into more detail. Am I still here?
Yeah, you look like you're frozen a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, and so depending, we can discuss sort of the technical aspects of the ordinance development process, or we can, vote on the resolution to request a meeting, or both.
I think, I don't have any, challenge with, requesting the meeting. I would like, for there to be some substantive discussion about the template itself. What are the thoughts on the board? What do we have to, what concerns do we have prior to, issuing it out to the public, which will be done at the conclusion of this meeting, if not tomorrow. I think it's important that we, move this process along, and I think the public is expecting us to do so. And so that would be my hope, is that we can, delve into some of these issues. We've got, sufficient time to head down that road. And I think that it would be helpful overall to do so.
Okay. I can take a few minutes to sort of summarize comments and even some of the responses from Ms. Robinson. I think the most important things are that we have sort of a clear power to get access to all information. Excuse me, start from the beginning. We want to get access to all citizen complaints. And, no matter how received or by whom. Unless we do that, we can never be sure that we have a good picture of the complaints that are coming into the police department. So that's kind of my first major concern, and certainly the first major concern of the ordinance work group. When we talked with the chief, she noted, as you mentioned, Bellevue, that soon there will be a sort of an automated process by which data will be shared, complaints will be shared between the website, between the CPD and the CRB. And the question is, we want to make sure that that data includes all the complaints and is not simply controlled by the police, and they have their choice to, whether to send us one or not. And so that's one of my comments. And I think we're on, fairly strong legal ground, given that the legislation allows the board to receive, investigate, and issue findings on complaints from civilians. It doesn't just say a subset, it says complaints. And Lisa has made an interesting response to that, which we might want to get into in a while, but let me just go through another couple points. The second important point, biggest point that I made was that we need, like many other oversight organizations have in the United States, that the CRB will get access to all information necessary to fulfill its functions. And again, the information access provisions in the current ordinance are kind of specific and kind of limited, and I think there needs to be a much a much broader, simpler statement that we can get information if we need it, and if at some point in our procedures we need to outline which information we might need and why, well, we can do that. Let's see.
Is that are you just outlining your points, or
Yeah,
can
I'm just outlining it. I'll go through like 4 or 5 and then we can talk, or do you want to talk about each one?
No, that's fine. You can do the 4 or 5, and then we can circle back to have further discussion.
Was this on a document? Was this on a document, Bill, that you had? Because I find it easier when I have something in front of me that I'm looking at.
This is on the template suggestions document that I sent her.
Okay.
So yeah, an interesting, a minor but I think important point is that the current ordinance says that the city council can remove board members. I have requested that be changed to for cause only. In other words, we would put this in a procedures document, what the grounds were, so there wouldn't be any sort of arbitrary, I don't like you, kind of kicking people off the board. The other 2 issues are the big ones, investigation and discipline. In terms of investigations, what I had asked for was that, we put in that ordinance kind of a specific list of here's what we do when we start an investigation. Lisa has proposed a simpler framework, which with her permission we can share later. And she suggested, for example, that we appoint a subcommittee or a select committee that can advise the executive director to make a decision, that we define very specific procedure. In our procedures, we define very specific list of criteria that would call an independent investigation into being, or allow us to request one. And I thought that was very constructive and very helpful. She also mentioned sort of difficulties, the practical difficulties of contracting with an independent investigator in terms of how we might do that and be consistent with the procurement processes that are in place in the city. And finally, and I think most importantly, is the issue of the board's disciplinary authority. Now, in the legislation, we are given binding disciplinary authority. That's the quote. And during our extensive discussions with our ordinance work group and stakeholders, we came up with a process through which we could make disciplinary recommendations to the chief of police, who could implement them or provide a reason why not. And then if we did not agree with the reason why not, we could appeal to the city manager. And again, Lisa's interpretation, and I don't want to do violence to it, is that we either have binding disciplinary action authority or we don't. That the legislation doesn't give us authority to make recommendations. And again, I may be misreading this, Lisa. And that in any event, the city manager is always going to be, the final arbiter. So I think we need to do some more, have some more discussion with the city attorney about, whether we can make a strong recommendation to the chief under the current legislation without being the body that actually implements the disciplinary authority. Now, I should probably stop talking so other people can say something.
Initially, what I was looking at going to the discipline part. So it says at the conclusion of any investigation conducted pursuant to subdivisions 1 and 2, above, consistent with the board's findings in the investigation, and after consultation with the chief of police. I think that is, I mean, as it's written, I mean, the chief would have to be part of that process to make binding disciplinary determinations in cases that involve serious breaches of departmental and professional standards. I think you had presented, what that definition of serious could be, but I don't know. And just for the public's sake, I don't know if it's a thing. And I think this is a concern that she had in our meeting, that we're going to have like daily disciplinary authority as opposed to just that serious part. So I mean, as I read it, it's limited to the consultation with the chief and whatever that definition of serious is. However we define it, it doesn't provide a blanket, a blanket opening for discipline. And the reason why I bring this up is in my conversations, or trying to feel out, where some of our votes would be, because we do need 3 of them. Would this be something that would torpedo the entire process, or can we get this nailed down ahead of time to make it a smooth transition, and getting the passage of the entire the ordinance? So that's the discipline part. And I think as with regard to the investigation, you'd mentioned the difficulties of contracting to get an investigator, attributing that to Ms. Robertson. If I'm not mistaken, I don't know that is necessary, and she can speak for herself, obviously, but I don't know that is. That's what it was. So to clarify, I think she was talking specifically of the city manager's role in getting that investigator, as opposed to, us going through the procurement process of getting the investigator, because I guess there's some nuance there where, he can't be both the decider and also, running the investigation itself. And I think that can get info. Yeah, those are the 2 initial ones that I had, and any other board member can add comments.
So
go ahead, James.
So there's a conflict of interest if the executive director or city manager, I think you might have said city manager, is involved in the hiring of a contracted investigator.
No.
No,
I think we're getting the engaging the investigator mixed up with my comments on the city manager's role in the disciplinary process.
Okay.
So what the current ordinance what your current ordinance requires right now is that, it talks about an independent investigation in a certain context right now. But what it says right now is the city manager has to have a consultation with the executive director, and then the city manager has to go procure the investigator. And so what I was recommending is that you should be able to be autonomous. So as long as you are complying with whatever procedures would apply to engaging an investigator, you all should have the ability to just engage the investigator and do the investigation. You shouldn't need you shouldn't need the city manager to go out and have to get involved in doing that. And that's how pretty much, any other department in the city, if they need a consultant, as long as there's money for that, they go through a procurement process, and the city manager doesn't himself have to go procure that service for a particular department. So my recommendation was that we actually get out of the current ordinance the language that suggests that the city manager has to be directly involved, and just let you all do your thing in accordance with whatever procurement policies might apply.
Okay.
On the separate issue of disciplinary authority, as I was reading, sort of your thoughts or your initial, proposal, what I think I was reading was that it said that you would make disciplinary recommendations to the chief, and then if the chief didn't accept those recommendations, you would appeal to the city manager, and that would then put the ball in the city manager's court to make the disciplinary decision. But right now, under the city's grievance policies, the grievance decision is made by the chief of police, and then the employee has the right to file a grievance. And that grievance goes first to the chief of police, or first to the supervisor. The chief is the ultimate supervisor, but a police officer might have an immediate supervisor and then a lieutenant, and there may be several layers in between the police officer and the chief. So the person would meet with the supervisor or the person who imposed the discipline. It would go through the chief of police, but the last step before you actually get to a grievance panel is you're entitled to a sit-down meeting with the city manager, who's supposed to try and give you a fair hearing and listen to your side of things. So where the conflict comes in the model that you were proposing is that you would be asking the city manager to participate in that original decision, but he's also the person that has to have a sort of give the person a process hearing under our current grievance procedure. So not saying it couldn't necessarily be done, but I think that if what you're looking for is to track the authority that the state gives you, the state actually gives boards the ability to make that binding disciplinary decision. So, this is probably the most complicated thing among all the powers you might have to sort of sort out, because it's something that's so foreign to all the procedures that are currently set up in the city. It's not that it can't be done, but I think the proposal that you have might need a little bit more tweaking.
Ms. Robertson, if I could ask, where in that current process would we come into the process? I mean, it sounds like it's preordained, and I don't hear us mentioned in that sequence that you just described. Is that what you're saying we need to tweak?
I think so. I think what we have to figure out, so what the state legislation says is that if you are already investigating something, there's two categories of investigations you can do. So if you're investigating something and you are making findings about, the conduct of a police officer, you have the right to consult with the officer's direct supervisor or commander. Now, the way I normally look at things, let's say there's a police officer. Very often a police officer's direct supervisor might be a sergeant, right, and that person's commander, let's say it might be a lieutenant. And I may not be getting this exactly right according to the ranks in the police department. But those terms don't necessarily reflect the authority of the chief of police within the department. So what I think we have to do, the issue here, and you all, I think this is in an area where you all also get to consult with your independent legal counsel too. You don't need to just be stuck with, you know, how I'm looking at this. But I think under the language of the state law, they haven't really addressed. But as I read binding disciplinary decision, I think we've got to sort through whether or not the General Assembly intended to substitute the board and a board decision on discipline for that of the chief of police.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether they did. I'm not saying they did or didn't. You know, as we move forward, you know, at some point, we'll have to work all of this out.
Yeah,
But let's say, for example, either if your authority were either substituted for the chief of police, or if the chief of police is included with the people that you have to consult with, I would say that the reference to a binding disciplinary determination would cause you to fall somewhere. Certainly your decision would come prior to a grievance panel appeal. So the employee receiving the discipline would certainly continue to be entitled to a grievance hearing. Whether or not your decision would go through the city manager, just like the chief of police decision does currently, is one of the things we'd have to work out.
Yeah, I think Lisa,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. I think Lisa, that was sort of one of the difficulties and ambiguities that we anticipated when we were thinking about our disciplinary authority and our possibly clever evasion of that was to make it give us advisory power and make it kind of hard for the chief to overturn it.
I'm not necessarily saying you couldn't do that.
And we could leave the city manager out of it entirely.
I'm not saying we couldn't figure out a way to work out that type of role. I just think the way that this particular version was worded, I don't know if we want to necessarily do something that's going to cause the city to have to go rewrite its entire grievance policy as well as this ordinance. So it's a work in progress.
Absolutely, and then we'll keep working on it. And we did talk about in our ordinance work group that where we would be vis-a-vis the grievance process if we decided that we were going to inflict or administer disciplinary action directly.
And that's
Philip.
Excuse me, that's a concern of mine, because it sounds as if, we are infringing, whether unintentionally or whatever, on due process of a grievance procedure that's been, in place for all city employees, not only police officers. So I would, and I know you will, just tread very cautiously with that. There is established policy, and I doubt that the intent of the legislators was to supersede or rewrite a city policy, when most city policies do follow due process and establish guidelines and legal guidelines.
But don't we also have to consider what the community wants as well when it comes to disciplinary, process? I think there's been a lot of, talk, whether it's, justified or not, that these civilian review boards will have a final say so on disciplinary actions, but I don't want to, like you say, not allow due process for some people, but also, realizing that some of these disciplinary processes also have resulted from the lack of due process for those who have been affected by what we might be considering. So I'm not sure if I want to water. It sounds like it's watering it down a little bit to kind of be cautious. But if we're not bold, I mean, thank you to what the Virginia legislature did in a lot of ways. But if we're not going to be bold about it and take on the mantle of as broad an impact that we can have, how are we ever going to have the community trust us when we do stuff?
Yeah, I understand that.
At the same time. My point is, we can be bold but legal at the same time. We just have to safeguard both due process for the complainant as well as the person as well as the system too. That's all I'm saying.
I agree, Philip. But can we use the phrase "reporting party" as a more humanizing phrase than complainant? Because sometimes I remember my retail days working as a waitress and department stores, and we talked about complainers. Oh, brother, was that a negative connotation when we had to go talk to an irate person? So if we can maybe change our language a little bit, I think it would be beneficial. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, we understand, Nancy, that our commission is to be as bold as we can. And we have, put our model out in front of the public, in front of stakeholders at our ordinance workshop. It's on, it's been on our agenda for the last couple of months. So we're not doing this lightly. And to address Lisa's, concern, yeah, I think we need to iterate on this a few times, to get to something that's fair and powerful and practical.
Well, there again, if we don't push it to the edge, how do we gain our credibility? Or not even us. I mean, this board, as it goes on, the legacy that is left and the legacy that people will assume as we, roll off this board. If we don't grab it as much as we can and push it as far as the legislation allows, if we seem like we're backtracking or, even though we have the best of intentions, we want the public to trust us. And right now, there's a lot of distrust on the national level for what's going on. And we want to make sure that Charlottesville, we're on the cusp of being the first Southern city to adopt a right to counsel action, which is exciting. Virginia has been the first state that will legalize marijuana possession July 1st. So there's a lot of firsts that are coming out of Virginia, and would like to see Charlottesville be on that wave of being firsts.
Message received.
Are there any additional comments on the first 5 points that Mr. Mendez has presented?
And you have, the other documents in your inboxes. The entire document is in your inboxes. So any of the other 17 points, just get back to me. I'm ready.
I've got a question. A few months ago, Lisa, we were talking about how do you protect the identification of witnesses or anybody who complains, and there was a question of whether or not the folks in Richmond took that into consideration. So if somebody sends me an email tomorrow and says, or sends the board an email, and they say, hey, the cops beat me up. How do we, and it just comes to our regular, or the CRB inbox. What is the protection that we have to, keep that information from being FOIA'd or whatever, to keep that person protected? Is that still an issue?
I think it is still an issue because the General Assembly did not develop a set of exemptions specific to these new review boards. Now, if you all can be considered as a board in the category of the FOIA exemption that applies to the records of a police internal investigation, then your records could be, one way to interpret that exemption, given the new board, might say that your records of your investigations, complaints coming in through, should be in that same category. You may or may not agree, and you may or may not want your records being referenced as, a variation of, a police administrative investigation. But if they don't fit within that exemption, there's not an exemption that I can find. And I've talked at length about this with Maisie Osteen, and also with Jake and Sally Hudson's office. I talked about the need as new boards maybe exercising the full authority as of July 1st, that you all are going to need some additional FOIA provisions that help you manage the names of reporting parties and witnesses in a way that you see fit. But I'm sorry to say, I don't really see a way that see a FOIA exemption that would apply right now. So the only way, and I think this is part of where the chief is coming from, really, if somebody wants to keep their name confidential, really the only way that that's available right now is if it does go through the police department.
And that reminded me of something. I believe there was a question about whether or not we would release the tracking sheet for the complaints that we have, due to, I guess, some of that discussion, and also because that will ultimately be a function of the executive director. That particular decision will be left to the executive director when he or she is placed here in the next month, 45 days or so.
Yeah, I see a weakness in all of that, because basically if somebody makes a complaint and then their name is leaked in the Daily Progress, a week later, they're not going to, people are going to be less inclined to come forward, right? And we haven't really had that happen, but it is a potential weakness, I think. And that's not necessarily our fault. That's just the way that I think there's a lot about this that the folks at the state level just haven't figured out yet. And some of it will probably end up being trial and error over a period of time. That's it.
All right. Sure. So are there any additional comments, Mr. Mendez? Did you want to, or say anything else on the topic? I think, I guess you've highlighted your major concerns there before we go to another public comment session.
I would like to vote on the resolution to invite the city council to a meeting as soon as possible.
Can we have a little 2-second discussion?
Sure.
My thought, if there's any way to do that in person, if there's any way to do that with masks on and in person, that would be great. Because I just think being in person is way more effective than this scenario, particularly with something that we've been working on now for about 10 or 11 months. It's more natural. Everybody may not be into that, but I think it'll be more effective. That's my thought.
I appreciate that, James. I kind of agree. We have Mr. Payne here as our liaison. Perhaps he can give us a temperature check on how the council might feel about that? How many do we need to have to attend for a work session? Is there a minimum amount?
Counselors? I would think a quorum if it's a work session, but I would think every counselor would want to be there. I'm open to in person, but can't speak for other counselors or exactly what where this city government and city employees are in terms of that. I would just need to talk to the city manager and council because I just can't speak for others.
Hey, I was gonna say one suggestion I have too. Some of the things we've been doing on my job is we'll oftentimes do meetings now where, folks who don't feel comfortable being in person will still be able to participate, like we're doing now. So it's more of a hybrid. I think a lot of businesses being operated that way now in just like middle school, elementary school. So I think that's probably going to be the direction that we're going to see across the board over the next couple of years.
Well, and maybe Michael can tell us if the board, the city council is going to have enough time anytime soon to meet with us. Perhaps later in the summer, that nobody will need to wear masks. But anyway, no, I would hope, do you see this occurring within a month?
I really would need to talk to council and the city manager. I mean, my thought is yes, but I always want to be cautious about not overcommitting if it's not possible. Our budget is going to be adopted April 13th. And after that, the number of work sessions is going to get less intense. But I do want to be very clear. I cannot speak for council or the city manager's office or where we're at in terms of our capacity. But I will definitely this evening email the city manager and council and let them know that it sounds like the board's formal recommendation is to meet to discuss this issue as soon as possible and have that begin figuring out exactly what that date is going to be. And is your explicit goal from the board within a month, by the end of May, just to be able to relay that?
Can I
by the end of May?
Did you get that, Councilor?
Sorry,
end of May.
Yeah, Mr. Mendez suggests by the end of May. Two things you had brought up. One about the budget, but
no. I said by the end of April.
Okay. Well, I will relay that, but I can't promise something will be scheduled by then.
So you had mentioned.
Let me clarify. I was requesting the end of April.
Heard.
So you had mentioned.
Was that clear? Was that heard?
Yes.
So you had mentioned, I guess, the ask for all counselors. I believe that at a minimum, 3 am I correct that 3 can attend? And the reason why I ask that is I don't want this process to be impeded by the fact that all counselors are not able to be there. I mean, if we have a minimum to be able to do the work and get this moving forward, on behalf of the public, I'd like to see that done if possible. And then just to circle back on the budget that you had mentioned, just wanted to make sure that we were going to get the capital that we were initially allocated or expecting at the beginning of the process?
When it comes to the budget, yes, that allocation that was there at the beginning of the process remains and was an increase over last budget's allocation. So not only has it not been cut, it was increased, and that is sustained in our budget. Relative to council meeting, again, the rule is anytime there are 3 or more counselors present, that triggers FOIA laws and it needs to be a publicly noticed meeting. We can do 2-2-1 meetings with 2 counselors with the board. And that really is up to you all, what you prefer, if you would like a work session with all of council versus if you want 2-2-1 meetings and make a request of 2 counselors to be present. Just I wasn't sure what the thumbs up and down was for, Mr. Mendez, but let us know what you prefer.
As many as possible.
Okay. So it sounds like the goal is really a
Can I
full work
call the
session call
question now?
council.
Yes. Can I call the question, please?
Yes, Mr. Mendez.
So we need to vote on it, I guess.
To make the formal ask, or
Well, no, I will restate my motion that we request a meeting with the city council to discuss our oversight model as soon as possible, period.
is there a second?
I second.
Okay. Ms. Robinson, would you pull the board?
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
You're on mute, Mr.
Yes, I'm sorry.
okay. Ms. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes,
and Mr. Watson.
Yes.
So that motion passes. And I do want to say that even though I voted in favor of this, if we don't get the entire board there, I would still, and I think the public would still like to see this work go forward. And I don't want the fact that we may not get the entire board to impede this process.
You mean council, right? When you say board?
I mean, yeah, council, sorry. Yeah,
So-
the entire council, even though I voted in favor of the ask, I don't want the fact that entire council can't be there to impede the progress of what, the public is expecting of us and what we're trying to do here.
So did we say 3 have to show up?
Well, I think the ask
Or 2?
from Mr. Mendez is that as many as possible. Ideally, the entire council. I think
Right.
to trigger that public is where the 3 comes into play. It seems and I'm not knocking Mr. Mendez, but it seems he's less in favor of the 221 as opposed to having the entire or as many as possible there.
It makes
that's go ahead.
Yeah, it makes the most sense to have as many there. Our time is precious, right? And they know what we've been working on for a year. So, I mean, we don't want to have like 9 meetings, right? So, they need to be there.
Yeah, and I think this will, we want to build momentum, and I think that by the time the meeting is scheduled and noticed, we will have made more progress on, what the final shape of the ordinance is going to be, so we can get a little bit into the weeds if we need to.
Okay. Are there any additional comments or questions prior to moving to public comment? Okay. Mr. Johnson, would you poll the attendees to see if there are any public comments that anyone would like to make?
Absolutely. If you'd like to speak to the board at this time, please click the raise hand icon in your Zoom webinar. Or if you're joining us via telephone, please press *9. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised.
Okay, very well.
I want to go back to the our empty board seat for a hot minute, and just say that our ordinance doesn't really define what historically designated communities that have been over policed really identifies. I know that we have one particular cohort. I think that comes from that language, but also there have been other members of the community that are have been over policed and sometimes have faced, negative interactions. And not that that's, a prerequisite, but I'm thinking, of people that are in the homeless community, people from the almost LGBTQIA community, people who have hearing issues and find it hard to communicate or difficult to communicate, with our law enforcement. So I'm just hoping that, when people think about what that language means, it doesn't mean that they're not part of a cohort that's part of that larger community. And so maybe that will, getting that out there will encompass a wider range of potential board members that can bring their lived experience to this board, as well as Ms. Gilmore and Ms. Johnson had, and we all have done in our way. So I just wanted to check in with that.
Could I just add to that also the Latinx community?
Yes, sir. I believe that, I guess all of that was kind of directed at you, Counselor Payne. So just making sure that that's noted.
Absolutely.
Okay. So as we're wrapping up here, our next, are we in April? Yeah. Our next NACOL training will be April 29th at 6 p.m. And Mr. Watson, have we nailed down a May? I believe that was the last training that we have available. Have we nailed down a time for that?
An actual date and time, or a
Yes,
time?
sir.
Date and time?
Yes, sir.
No, I have not. So we just need to reach out to them and nail that down.
Okay, very well. I think that brings us to our final agenda item, which is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Okay.
Okay. Ms. Robinson, would you poll the board?
Sure. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
Yes.
Ms. Gilmore,
Yes.
Mr. Mendez,
Yes.
and Mr. Watson.
Yes.
So that motion passes. I want to thank you all for your involvement and engagement tonight, and your time and your effort and energy that you put forward in doing this work. Obviously, we have some challenges, or we take some heat from different sides of the community, but I just personally want to thank you all for being involved. With that, our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you all.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night.